All right, we're back with another episode of Woke Nation. It is the 6th of May, and for those of you, yes, welcome back to Woke Nation. It is now the 6th of May. For those of you just tuning in, I've been doing a lot of episodes that try to try to avoid just regurgitating news, as I've said before, and try to get into something a little more substantial. So what I intended to do today was actually talk about my own personal experience in relation to something that is ravaging the country right now, which is the opioid epidemic, the opiate epidemic that the last statistics that I heard are, I think, upwards of 50,000 people a year are dying because of overdoses. Now, a lot of this has to do not just with heroin, but because fentanyl is now being introduced into the heroin. It's cut with heroin now. And that puts the potency of the drug through the roof. And so if you don't know that you're getting heroin that's cut with fentanyl, it's very easy to overdose because the margin, your margin for error of taking too much is just almost null and void. I mean, all it takes is a little bit more and you'll die. I personally, to my knowledge, I've never taken fentanyl. I mean, that doesn't mean some of the stuff that I got before didn't have fentanyl in it, but that's neither here nor there. I didn't know about it. But anyway, I wanted to, since I am a recovering or recovered addict, however you want to phrase it. Some people say they are recovered. Other people say that this is actually nonsense, that you're never actually recovered. You're always a recovering addict. I don't know really where I stand on that. I know that I understand the concept that this is something that I will always struggle with for as long as I'm here on this earth, but I hesitate to think that to an extent I won't have some sort of control over it. But then I've also been told by a lot of people that that mentality that you have control over your disease is actually a flaw in and of itself, and is one of the first signs that you're heading towards a relapse. I don't agree with that, but that's neither here nor there. But what's important is the understanding and the acknowledgement that each individual who suffers from addiction must take to understand and acknowledge that they are in fact an addict. That's the first step, and I would agree, towards recovery, is in acknowledging your plight, your situation, your weakness, your sin, if you want to call it that. And we'll get into that. I don't want to jump too far ahead of myself. I'm going to be doing several episodes about this because this is a very wide-ranging, very deep issue. There are no easy answers. Anybody who's been addicted to any drug, whether it's heroin or cocaine or alcohol or anything, or even just over-the-counter, well, not over-the-counter, but legally prescribed anxiety medication like Xanax or Klonopins or any of those kinds, will know that this stuff, there are a wide, almost endless number of reasons for why a person may actually become addicted. Now, the fundamental bottom line reasons, I think, are always the same in a lot of cases. Loss, suffering, or just a total lack of motivation in a positive direction, which I think was a big part of it for me. Well, actually, I would say I was all of the above. You know, there was pain that I was trying to avoid, there was suffering that I was trying to avoid and drowned out, tremendous amount of anxiety, doubt, fear, you name it. But also a tremendous. There was no motivation in another direction, if you will, and so addiction won by default. And that's exactly how William S. Burroughs, the famous writer, himself puts it: is that addiction for him, he had no motivation in a positive direction, and so addiction won by default. Okay. So my own story, since I want to actually put this out there, because I think it's important so that people can relate and see where, and gain encouragement from an addict story who's moved on and actually, and I don't say this in any sort of a prideful way. I'm extremely humble about how far I've come since I was an actual junkie. If you just want to be honest, that's what I was. Um, so I'm very humble about it. The fact that I'm still sitting here is nothing. There's nothing in and of myself that I would say I'm better than anybody, or I'm lucky, or any of that nonsense. I had family that supported me, and who never threw me out or rejected me, but always helped and always supported and always prayed. And then I believe that without God, I wouldn't be here, obviously, because I did a lot of the same things that anybody else did. Took the same amounts, doses, same drugs, whatever, and yet they are dead and I am not. So it takes a lot of humility to really look at that, because they were just the same as me. There's no difference between me and somebody who's overdosed. But anyway, as far as my own story goes, as far as drugs and alcohol and addiction, I would say for me from the very beginning, and a lot of addicts I think will attest to this. The seeds of addiction, or oh, sorry, I'm moving the camera for those of you who are watching this. This is going to be on podcast and on YouTube, this episode, on my YouTube channel. But anyway, for myself, I will say that I was a natural born addict. Even before I was using any kind of drugs or anything of that nature, I was a lot of the behaviors, the obsessive compulsive, the anxiety, the irrationality, the depression, all that stuff was there from the very beginning. Yeah, and I just exercised it or dealt with it in a different way, and we did it. Me and my friends, who all, I'm not going to speak for them, but all had their own issues with addiction as well, and I'm not going to name them, for various reasons, obviously. But we would do outlandish stuff, daredevil type stuff, egging cars. Not that I'm saying that's daredevil, but I just mean we did a lot of extreme stuff. Just jumping off of roofs. We would go into construction sites and vandalize stuff. We would climb along the rooftops of new houses and jump off the roof, second story roof onto a garage roof, and just, get a running start. We used to have battles with each other with PVC pipes, throwing them at each other as hard as we could, launching ourselves over basically cliffs on our bikes, hoping you would land okay, streaking, just all this stupid. When they were building the new construction houses behind my parents' development, we would put our T-shirts over our heads like the Taliban, and and break into their little office there, and take all their blueprints and make a bonfire out of them. And then then there was this ensuing thing where they were trying to keep us out of this trailer. That's what it was, a trailer where all the blueprints were. And we would just, it was like a game. They would lock one door, we'd go in the window. They would lock the window, we'd break the lock off the door. And it just kept going. And it was just all that stupid kind of stuff, but it was this irresponsible, reckless behavior. And I could go on and on with all the stupid stuff we did, but a lot of it was just very reckless and stupid. And all of us agreed as time went on that the seeds of what we did later, was there at those times, before any of us used even weed or anything like that. That kind of behavior was present from the start, and we all kind of felt it. And this is what I think drives a lot of kids and teenagers today, is this sort of, like, in the culture, just this ennui, as the French call it, boredom, just empty boredom, with society. I see that in a lot of kids today. And I think a lot of it, I don't want to get too, I want to stick to addiction here with this one in my story, but I think a lot of that is because we've sucked the value out of society today, and everything is very relativistic. And so, there's just no ultimate meaning, I see. And especially when you're going into a culture that is very, there's a tremendous amount of pressure on kids to go to college, to get a job, to get married. Your life is basically laid out before you as to what you should do. And I know in our group, especially there for a little while, a lot of us were just kind of like, we rejected that, or at least I did. And I know some of the others, even though they went to college, there was just this sort of, like, bitterness and mistrust, and just this rebellion against just the emptiness kind of the corporate world and of society. And just what we saw was this, just a restless boredom, really, and a futile. You looked on life kind of like as this futile thing. That's how I did. I really, so I'm going to focus on me. So I was raised in a Christian home, and a lot of what I did was a rebellion against that. Now, it was very strange for me, because while I always believed most of the things that I was taught, that there is a God, I believed in Christ. On some level, I was sorry for my sins, even though I was doing a lot of things I shouldn't. But there was a lot of things going on inside me, as far as, like, doubt, fear, anxiety, just a lack of assurance in a lot of ways. And that's because I wasn't trusting God, really. I see that now, looking back, that I didn't understand how to trust Him in life, So I felt a lot of the times I would run into the situation where, like, if I didn't get it, I thought, like, salvation and the way God spoke to you and everything was always going to be this emotional thing. Like, I was going to have emotional experiences based off of that, and that's how I would have assurance and all these things. And when I didn't have these emotional experiences, I really started to doubt whether I was a Christian, whether these things were real, whether there's something just wrong with me. For a long time, I had this really deep belief that I was just this wretched thing, and I really didn't have much value. And as you start believing that, it's just this downward spiral. You really, once you believe something like that you don't have some kind of intrinsic value, and that you're just this wretched thing. I really started to think of it as like, that's how I was. Just my perspective of myself was atrocious. And of course, as time went on, the drugs just fed that. But anyway, so. So I was having a lot of struggles with that through high school and everything, and my outlet for that was all the daredevil, stupid, rebellious vandalism, just the dumb stuff that we did as kids. Now, once we got out of high school, because I didn't drink or do anything until I was out of high school. I was homeschooled, and that was another big thing too. Is I really at the time wanted to be accepted by my peers the way a lot of teenagers would want to be, and so I wanted to go to a normal school. I wanted to be like the other kids. Well, my parents were wise. They knew that if I went to a normal school, that would probably be the end of me. Because at the time I was a follower. Just to be honest, I was. I wanted to be accepted. I followed people. The people I followed were not the people that you should be following. I didn't choose good role models. I always chose to hang out with the losers and the people who didn't study or do their homework. So instead of going to a normal public school, I went to a homeschool school called Toll, where you went there once a week, and then you went there on Monday, and they gave you your homework for the rest of the week, and then you went home and did it. So it was basically homeschooling with one day where you were in a normal school atmosphere. So I guess you could say my parents compromised, and I begged to go there because I saw that was the closest thing that was going to be like school. Looking back on it, my parents did everything right. There's nothing I can say. Most of the problems were just with me. My dad and we did butt heads quite often. There are things that I still disagree with him on, but a lot of it was just my inability, and I think a lot of teenagers are this way, your inability to understand that you're only going to be living at home a very temporary time. It's a very temporary time period in your life. It's a drop in the bucket. The vast majority of your life is going to be spent as an adult making decisions and being able to choose to do what you want to do. That's when your choices have consequences. That's why the choices you make in your house should be somewhat guarded by your parents so that you can learn what those consequences may be later on. If you don't have discipline or a guiding force around you, like your parents, who are basically put there by God, then you get what we have today: a lot of lawlessness, a lot of why do you think the crime rates in the ghettos and in poor communities, whether white or black, it doesn't matter, are so high when you have this high rate of fatherlessness? Where fathers are not active members in the family or are just not there at all, you have a tremendous amount of crime and kids growing up to end up in the prison system, because they don't have. That's what God put the father there to do, to be a role model, to be a spiritual role model, and to bring children up in the way that they should go, and to discipline them when they needed to be disciplined. My dad did all those things. He was there. So my problem wasn't him not being there. It's just we clashed a lot. And I think, every parent doesn't, there is no perfect parent. So I could say, yeah, I'm a parent now. I'll be 34. I have a 3-year-old. Do I do everything that my dad did? No. Do I agree with the way he raised me in every single aspect? No. But that's not the point. The point is I was supposed to obey him and trust him and trust that he's doing the best for me, just like my son hopefully will do for me when he gets older and is a teenager. Although if there's such a thing as karma, no, he will probably just rebel against me the way I did against my dad. If karma's real, which I don't really believe in it, but you know what I mean. So there was a big part of it too, for me, going back to church and everything, and my doubt and my fear and my lack of assurance in whether I truly trusted Christ or truly repented of my sins and all these things. That was very debilitating. So if you don't have that assurance, if you don't know whether you're really trusting, you're really believing, to me at least, I felt like just a ship without an anchor. I really felt just like totally cut off, and I just felt like I had no rudder, no direction. I didn't know who I was or really what I believed because I had no foundation underneath me. That's why today I am so obsessed, and not obsessed, but Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, I'm so passionate about the idea that you have to have a foundation underneath you for what you believe that you build up off of. If you don't have a foundation, if you don't have an anchor, if you just look at the world and say, "Well, I don't know what I believe," and I just kind of wander through life, you're going to end up just like I did. There is there's nothing positive about that relativistic, rudderless, anchorless perspective. At least not for me, there wasn't. I had no sense of self on who I should be, what I should be, where I should be going. It was a horrifying thing to go through. And so when I ran into alcohol or drugs, that to me was like, this was awesome because it numbed all of that. Um, and so, when I was like 19 years old, um, that's when I first tried weed and everything. My friend caught, or I'm not going to say his name, he'll kill me. He had some, and so I tried it, and I didn't really like it. I was like 19 at the time when I first started experimenting with things, but and I remember one time, the very first time that I got drunk, we were up at my friend's house and we broke into his parents' liquor cabinet. This was in the middle of the day. We were idiots. And for some reason, we thought we wouldn't get caught if we drank like tequila, a bottle of martini, a bottle of champagne, a couple Mike's Hard lemonades. And then if we just went to the playground and chilled out, we would be okay. This having never drank before. Now, if I did that now, I would still be hammered. But doing that for your first time, I was blacked out and puking everywhere. And so was everybody else. It was this big ordeal. My mom cried. I felt terrible. And I swore I would never drink again. Which, how many times have we all said that? Waking up the next morning hungover, a mountain of regret on our shoulders. But anyway, where I really started with addiction, though, you know, so I experimented for a little while, but then I moved out of my parents' house. And I got an apartment in Newark, Delaware, and I was painting for a painting company. This guy, uh, I won't say his name. He had a painting company. I ended up working there almost 10 years. But there was a guy that worked with us. His name was Chris, and it doesn't matter if I say his name or not. And he, just one day we were talking, and we were working near Wilmington, Delaware. And I remember he admitted to me that he had been addicted to heroin for the past 8 months. And now that I had this apartment, I was still going through all that anxiety and just this total lack of direction. I had just gotten this apartment, and I was at this point thinking to myself, why did I even get this stupid apartment? I had no idea why I had gotten it. I just did it on impulse because I didn't know what else to do with my life. And so when he said that, I was just like, well, I'll try it. And so we drove into Wilmington, and that was where my addiction started. And I've heard so many people say that, and I think this is true, one of the main reasons why people have such a hard time getting off of heroin is not just because the drug itself is tremendously addicting, which it is. It takes over your psychologically and physically. You're totally a slave to it, mentally and physically. That's true addiction. These people that talk about caffeine or marijuana as being addicting don't have a clue what addiction is. Addiction is in a total enslavement on a physical and a psychological level. Your entire being is chained to this thing. Without it, you cannot function, you cannot think, you cannot do anything. That is addiction. Anything outside of that is child's play. And people that tell you that marijuana or something like that is addicting have no idea what they're talking about. But anyway, so we go down there to Wilmington, and we went down 3rd Street. And on 3rd Street, they all stand out on the corner. I used to think of them as like scarecrows with their arms hanging out, and you signal to them however many bags you want, and you say down because down is the lingo in Wilmington for heroin, dope, down because it's a downer. Um, And so you pull over, and this is called window shopping or street shopping or whatever, because you don't, and it's very risky because a lot of the times the dealers will give you fake drugs. They'll give you talcum powder or something like that, or they could poison you, or like what's happening today, which thank God it didn't happen to me, at least not that I know of. They give you something laced with fentanyl, and then you overdose and die. You don't know what you're getting from these people. And a lot of the people that stand out on those corners on 3rd Street in Wilmington are addicts themselves. And why would you trust, it's a bad deal. Not to mention the police officers and the murders that take place down there on an everyday basis. 3rd Street in Wilmington is what they call the jungle. It's in the middle of, it's right off of 4th Street. 3rd and Franklin, all those areas are known in that city as hotspots for drugs. And it's the middle of the ghetto. It's What else do you say? Every stereotypical thing you can possibly think about the ghetto is what 3rd Street in Wilmington is. But I was hooked immediately, not just by the drug, because I was hooked the minute I went down 3rd Street. Because to me, from this white kid who had grown up in the country in a strict Christian home and was homeschooled his whole life. To me, this was like I had never seen a world like this. And to a lot of people that might be shocking, but to me at the time, I was hooked immediately. Like, to me, there was this excitement down there, this thrill, this danger, this rush to just going down there. After a while, I used to just drive down there anyway. Just even if I wasn't buying something, I would just drive up and down 4th Street, around 3rd Street, just because the atmosphere, the feel of the streets. A lot of people talk about that, how you get addicted also to the streets themselves, and to that rush of being in that thrill of danger. You get hooked on that as well. So we went down there. We got 1 or 2 bags. He did his. I remember he dumped out a tiny little piece of, it was like a matchstick head of powder, and you snort it. And I understood immediately, and then probably, I remember after about 30 minutes of feeling like I was in a warm bath, I understood immediately why people throw their lives down the drain for this stuff. I knew it immediately. Um, and long stories I could go on forever, but from that point on, I was going down there as often as I could with this guy. And he eventually, you don't want to keep street shopping, so we found dealers and all that kind of stuff. I did it for about 8 months, and I think but I wasn't doing very much, and I never, at that point at least, I didn't get psychologically like dependent on it. I wasn't enslaved to it psychologically. I didn't have to have it. Now, if you do anything for several months on end, and some people might not find it believable that I wasn't totally addicted, but I wasn't. When I wanted to stop after about 7, 8 months of off and on, 7, 8 months off and on. I did. I just stopped. And I went through, I felt like crap physically, but, there was no desire mentally to go down there to get it, to have anything to do with it. I just got sick of it because I realized, like, I was at a point I knew where, okay, I'm either going to be spending a lot of money or I just need to stop, because it was to the point where just a couple bags really wasn't doing much for me, and I was like, all right, I don't want to spend all my money on this. I'm not trying to end up like that. So the fun of it was kind of evaporating. I just was starting to get a little bored with it, so I just stopped. And for quite a while, I stayed away from it. Now, in the meantime, I was drinking, I was partying with people, smoking weed all the time, that kind of stuff. Uh, Living an immoral, godless, sinful lifestyle like that, besides the fact that God commands us not to do these things, not to sin, not to be drunkards or addicts, there are consequences to this. That's one of the things I like always expounding on, God's law is pointing out the logically good reasons he has for telling us not to do certain things. So if you spend all your money on alcohol or beer and you're constantly, excuse me, partying and all that stuff, is it any wonder that maybe you won't have enough money for the rent when it comes around? You know? Just a simple little thing like that. You won't have the money for rent if you're drinking beer, smoking weed, and playing poker every night, and you suck at poker, which I did. I'd like to flatter myself at the time and think I was actually decent. I watched biographies of Stu Unger, who was the world's greatest poker player. I even read a biography of him. And he died penniless and addicted to crack cocaine in a hotel in Las Vegas. But I sucked at poker, and so anytime I played it, my money went straight out the window. So you combine all those things, and Peter couldn't pay rent after a while, and the guy that was living with me was doing all the same things I was doing, and so his money was of no help either because he had none, just like me. Go figure. These things happen. So I had to move home, which was humiliating, and I was in a mountain of debt. And my dad graciously helped me out with that. He got me on a payment plan, helped dig me out of debt. Meanwhile, I was living at home. Years went by where I was mostly just partying on the weekends, and I was smoking a lot of weed every day, basically. But I was holding a job, same painting company. I worked there for 10 years. So yeah. And then what happened was, if you fast forward about 4 or 5 years, Percocets, which is usually how most people start their addiction. They start it with pills, and then when their tolerance goes up, and when pills become too expensive, like Percocets or Oxycontin or Dilaudids or Opanas or fentanyl or what have you, even fentanyl lollipops, then they move on to heroin because it's a lot cheaper, and you can get it more pure, and it's easier to shoot, which a lot of people do with needles. But so I was kind of ahead of my time in my area. While I was doing dope, when I was living in my apartment, none of the people in my area were with me or hanging out with me. I kind of had cut myself off from them because nobody in my area that I knew was involved with that. There was no Percocets around. This was before the opiate crisis that we're seeing today. So I was a pioneer, in a way, not a good way. I was ahead of my time, if you could call it that. And so yeah. But then Percocets hit the area, and this is after, of course, years of me not really having been around opiates. And as soon as I remember, a friend of mine said, "Hey, this guy over here is selling Perc 30s. Here's his number. If you want to get some, go ahead and give it a shot." So I went over there, and he was selling them for $25 a pop, which is the average going price of a Perc 30, $25. It's outrageously expensive. And I bought 4 of them. And I remember after doing that, when he told me that, yeah, this is my number, you can call me whenever, I always have them. I remember driving home from there and thinking to myself, I'm going to get addicted to these. Because I knew that it was too easy now to get. It's right there. This guy lived 10 minutes from my house, back in my area. This wasn't the city. This wasn't Wilmington. I didn't have to go to the ghetto. This is right here in the country. And this was somebody I had known before, so I knew I was doomed. So yeah, for a long time there, and that was the beginning of when Percocets really fell like an avalanche, like a snowstorm on our area. And I just watched as absolutely everybody started doing Percocets, and Oxycontin and Dilaudids, but Perc 30s were really the most popular pill. And a lot of these people, I found it really humorous in a dark way. A lot of people, when they first started doing Percocets, would tell me, no, I'll never do heroin. That's disgusting. Like, I just like doing pills every once in a while. And then you see that slow progression. For some people, it wasn't slow at all, but this progression from Percocets immediately into heroin, and then you see, and that's one of the most common hallmarks, telltale signs of addiction, is that progression of all your don'ts, of all the things that you swear you'll never do, you start doing as your addiction progresses. You have lines in the sand that you swear you'll never cross, and you cross every single one of them. And as you cross them, you rationalize why. Well, I just, Percocets are too expensive anymore. I'm all right though. I'll just do a few bags here and there. I'm okay. So it wasn't too much longer. It wasn't long before heroin um, fell in on the whole area, and then people were just selling heroin and doing heroin, and meanwhile, people are starting to die. People are starting to overdose. I remember one kid, he was 16 years old, and there's a drug called Suboxone, which is used by rehab clinics and maintenance clinics to wean you off of heroin, but it can also be abused. And this kid had been drinking. He was like 15 years old. And he took a couple Suboxones, and he never woke up in the morning. And apparently he had been drinking cough syrup too. The kid was out of his mind, crazy, just. But that's this is the absolute horror and tragedy of this disease, is how it kills people so young. It does not discriminate against anybody. It doesn't matter who you are, how wealthy you are, how poor you are, white, black, red, green, purple, gay, transsexual, straight, cisgender, white, patriarchal, matriarchal. It does not matter who you are. You can die just as easily as the next guy if that bag has your name on it. That's how you can put it. It does not matter. And so yeah, people started to die, and the shocking thing about it, this tells you how sick like your addiction can actually be, is that as people start dying around you, like you pick up the phone and you hear, yeah, did you hear so and so just died? Your first instinct as an addict, your first thought, beyond there's this little twinge of, oh, that sucks, really, he's dead. Oh man, what did he die of? Oh, this guy sold him some bags, so he overdosed on those bags. Yeah, he overdosed. And your first thought is, that stuff, that must be some good stuff, and you want to go and get it. So the stuff that just killed this guy, you want to go and get, because he must have died because it was very strong. And as your addiction progresses and your tolerance, it gets harder and harder to get high. So that's how sick it gets, is that you actually, your first instinct is to go and get the stuff that just killed your friend or your acquaintance or whoever, rather than mourning, rather than feeling sorry, or taking it as a warning sign. Oh man, people are dying now. I could die next. Maybe I should stop. No, your first thought is, I'm going to go get the same stuff because it must be good. Um, that's shocking. And it really, if I hadn't been so desensitized to what was going on, it would have caused me to stop, but it didn't. Um, and so after a certain point, I um, I started going back to the city, and that's where things really started to kind of plunge down. By this point, I was in my late 20s, and you start to realize that, as you watch your brothers, your friends that aren't addicts are actually moving on with their lives and making something of themselves. By this point, people have been through college, they're starting careers or traveling or doing this or doing that. And so I never got on Facebook, because the first thing I would see on Facebook is somebody going here or going there or graduating from this or graduating from that. And meanwhile, I'm in a crack house in Wilmington, because that's what ended up happening. I went down to Wilmington one day, and this lady that I knew, and we would kind of get together and pool our money, and help each other out. She had a niece who was basically a prostitute in Wilmington on Maryland Avenue, and there is a house. I'm not 900. It's in the 900s. It's the greenhouse with. It's the house with the green awning on Maryland Avenue, right across from the laundromat. Um, I won't say the names, but whatever. Um, but this lady, um, we'll say her name is Betty. Her house, I mean, it was the most filthy house you could ever be in. I mean, there were cockroaches going up the walls. She would come down the steps sometimes, and just her arms and legs and her neck would be all bit up from bed bugs, just red blotches all over. She never bathed, never showered. Just the place stank. She had a son named Joey, and I'm just calling him Joey. That wasn't his real name. uh, who I think he had gotten hit by a car when he was young, and then his girlfriend had given him an overdose of ecstasy. So this kid was, he thought he had his own drug lab in the back of the house, which was like kind of I want to say a conservative. It was like a glass, like a greenhouse type place, because their house probably was nice at one time. It was a type of row home on Maryland Avenue, and he thought he had convinced himself that he would take construction paper, different colors of it, and cut it up into squares, and think that he was making acid, and then he would give me little dots of it, micro dots, trying to convince me that I was going to hallucinate if I ate cardboard paper or construction paper, which I would take the tab and tell him 20 minutes later that I was seeing some wild stuff. That's who I was around all the time. And this house, this lady Betty, she was like kind of like the godfather of the area. She really was. She had connections to everybody. If you wanted, it didn't matter what you wanted, any drug, anything. I mean, she had people that were shoplifters that you would give them a piece of paper with a list of things that you wanted, and he would go get them for you. They call it boosting from the stores. I mean, the ladies of the night went in and out of that house. How the place never got busted by the cops, I have no idea. But I was always there because, and this is how stupid I was. I thought for some reason that there was, in the beginning when I first got into this place, I really thought I thought this place was exciting because there was always action going on. There was always somebody bursting in with a story, or this is happening. There was always just mountains of drugs, or guns, or this or that. Like, there was all, I thought it was exciting. Again, just like years before when I had first started going down 3rd Street, and that's that addiction to the streets, and I really by that point started to get sucked into it. There was a couple dealers that I would take them to re-up and everything. I was constantly driving them around. No idea how I had PA tags in Wilmington, and driving around areas where I'm the only white person, like PA tags, white dude, driving around a car. Full of African Americans. Not that I'm prejudiced, but the cops can be. And it just shocks me that nobody ever pulled me over. Nobody ever asked me, what are you doing down here? I mean, I would walk around like with not a care in the world down there. Nobody jumped me. Nobody ever shot at me. No cops ever tried to talk to me. Like, I have no idea how I got away with it for as long as I did. The only thing I can say is that God was watching over me. I mean, how else do you rationalize that? But by this point in my life, like, I had become so entrenched in all these negative thoughts about myself. And I had this very futile look on life that had started in a young age, this bitterness and everything because of my doubts and my fears and my insecurities. As I mentioned before, I had a very negative view of myself. Any relationships, I had no long-term relationships whatsoever because I had no idea how to connect or really grow with a person because I had never grown as a person. I had no idea what a meaningful, healthy relationship would even look like. And so anybody I dated, I never brought home because I knew deep down this is going to go nowhere because I didn't know how to love. I didn't know how to give. I didn't know how to do anything. And I had a very tragic view on life that none of these things would ever happen for me either. Obviously the drug only compounds that because your conscience is attacking you. At least it was for me the entire time. But then it starts to become seared. And then again, as I said, as you cross all those lines in the sand where you say, "I will never do this. I will never do this. I will never do this." As you start to cross them, you don't do that with impunity. That doesn't just happen and there's no consequences. Even if there's no external consequences, sometimes what it does to you on the inside is an entirely different matter. It does things to your sense of self-esteem, your morals, your outlook on life, your perspective, your hopes. All those things can slowly become eroded away and crushed and done away with as you cross lines that you said you never would, as you rationalize immoral acts. Um, yeah. So eventually it got to the point where and one thing I will say is because I was raised in such a moral home, a Christian home, I never stole. I never prostituted. I never stole. I never did any of these things. I sold drugs here and there. But beyond that, I didn't break the law beyond buying drugs, obviously, and I would drive people to drug deals. And beyond that kind of stuff, I wasn't robbing places, I wasn't stealing, I wasn't cheating people. I had nothing to do with those ladies of the night beyond the fact that I was at the houses. I was at this house that they would frequent, but I had no association with any of their activities in any way at all. Any way at all. I want to emphasize that. Yeah. But and a lot of that was because of the way I was raised. I was taught not to steal, and so my conscience didn't allow me. I was restrained from doing these things by my conscience, by God. So the way I fed my addiction and my ever rising um, dependency, or what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Not just dependency, but tolerance. That's what, because your tolerance goes through the roof at a certain point. Like you don't even get high anymore. It doesn't matter how much you do. One is too many, and 1,000 is never enough, as they say. Um, but I was working, nonstop. I would work 7 days in a row, and I had my own customers that I was painting for. On the surface, on the outside, unless somebody really knew me and was involved in my daily life, you probably had no idea that any of this was going on, that I was spending my time down in Wilmington in a crack house, because I showed up. Excuse me, I showed up for work every day, and I would work 8, 10 hours and then go to my own personal jobs after that. Now I would stop in between and meet a dealer or two, but I was a functioning addict on the outside to a lot of people. I had a car, I made car payments, I paid my insurance, I kept up with things. On the outside, I was always broke. I was living paycheck to paycheck, but on the outside, it looked like I was actually working. And, a lot of people were wondering, what's going on here? Why haven't you moved out of your parents' house? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? They just thought, well, he just hasn't found his calling in life yet. No, it was not. It was a little bit more than that, you could say. But anyway. So yeah, at a certain point I just got totally sick of it. I just couldn't work myself to death anymore like that, and I wasn't getting high anymore, which was the ultimate. Because for me, a lot of people would get a bundle, which is like 13 bags of dope. They would get that, and they would purposefully, do a little here, do a little there, and they would stretch it out and throughout the day so that they were never sick. I had no control like that. A lot of other people I knew did. They would do just enough so that they weren't sick, and then they would, space it out throughout the day, throughout the night, and make sure they had enough for the next morning so that they wouldn't wake up withdrawing. I, even knowing that I would withdraw the next morning, if I didn't space it out, I would do it all. I would stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning doing it all. I had zero restraint when it came to that. If I went to bed and I knew that there were bags in my pocket or in my wallet or in my desk drawer that I hadn't done yet, it took an enormous amount of restraint to go to sleep, to go to bed. I just couldn't bring myself to do it, knowing that it was there and that I could do it. It would just be like a voice saying, come on, let's go, let's have fun. Like I just couldn't do it. I would stay up till 3 o'clock in the morning, just passing out off and on into my laptop, face forward. I remember even one time I woke up and I had, with my face on the keyboard and the letter Z, because I had been typing, I guess writing or something, and the letter Z had been printed across the page, a blank Word document, probably 30,000 times, which I thought was funny, and I told everybody. But I just had zero restraint like that. That's the kind of enslavement that I got to. It was the only thing I ever thought of from my waking moment until I went to bed. And even in what I noticed, and this is how sick that stuff is, that even when you have enough money sometimes, like, because I, like anybody else, I went through times of plenty and times of famine, as far as money and drugs went. There were times when I was making plenty of money, and so I had the extra money to just go on a wild binge or whatever. And what I noticed was, even when I had enough money and I thought, and I would buy a huge amount, for me, an enormous amount of dope or whatever. I would buy what they call a log, which is 10 bundles all in one. And I would get a good price on it or whatever. And I think, wow, I'm set for a while. But that compulsion, that sickness, that dependency, that I have to do it, that I can't, that as long as I'm in possession of it, there is no spacing it out. Like, I'm going to do it no matter what. And I remember times where I would do so much of it, so incredibly much of this stuff, that that I would that I would actually didn't feel good anymore at all. I actually felt like crap, and yet that compulsion would just keep me going. Like, I just felt like I had to do it. I had to do it, even though it was actually making me feel ill, like not good at all. Like, actually felt like crap. Like, oh, I don't feel good at all. This is not fun anymore. Like, I need to not do anymore today. I need to wait. But just the idea that I still have like another four in my pocket right now, I have to do them. Like, that's how bad it was. That's how, like, bent on it my mind was. And as far as the physical, so that's the psychological enslavement. Now, as far as the physical, forget about it. I mean, a bundle a day didn't keep me from being sick usually. I woke up the next day sick as a dog usually. If I really wanted to feel well, I had to have at least two bundles, which is, there's 13 bags in a bundle, that's 26 bags, just to feel decent. So, I mean, after a certain point, I just couldn't do that anymore. But the truth be told, I didn't really want to quit, but yet I had reached a point where I had just worn myself so thin. So I went into rehab at a place called White Deer Run in Lancaster. And I told my boss, and he felt bad for me, and he was like, "Well, you know what? Because I did work hard, and on the surface I was responsible and all this." He said, "You still have a job when you get back. Just go and then call me when you're back. It would be what, 30 days?" I was like, "Yeah, 30 days." And I came clean to my parents. Up to this point, I don't know what my parents knew about my activities. To this day, I really haven't, like, asked them. Um, so I have no idea. Maybe they knew, maybe they didn't. But if they did know, they didn't say anything. Um, but a lot of that, I don't blame them for that in any way, shape, or form. I really don't, because I had set the precedent there. I had made numerous comments to them over time that, you stay, basically telling them to stay out of my personal life. So basically, if you go through my stuff, I'll leave and you'll never see me again. Stuff like that. Just stupid stuff, some wrong-headed, mean-spirited stuff to say. And I am sorry that I ever said anything like that. There's a lot of things that I have a tremendous amount of regret over. Just my behavior and things I said to them. And, when you look back on it, and this is one of the worst things, it's all that lost time, all that time that's just been lost. I have a good relationship with them now, and I'm so glad for that. But sometimes I do feel tremendously guilty over the time that was lost. That was 10 years. My entire 20s, they have no idea who I was or what I was doing or anything. And yet they would always be kind and want to talk and, how was your day? And it's just, I don't like thinking about it. It wasn't good. But anyway, so I came clean to them. I told them I'm addicted to opiates. Basically, I said Percocets uh, because that's what I felt like they could wrap their mind around. Honestly, I mean, if you say heroin, people think about a toothless guy in the gutter with 5 needles sticking out of his jugular. I didn't want to devastate them. And quite honestly, I was just addicted. I was addicted to opiates. If somebody put Percocets in front of me, it would have made me feel just as good as dope did. There's no difference. Percocets are heroin. That's all they are. They're laboratory made heroin. And for anyone that's listening who thinks that, and who is using or abusing or addicted to Percocets and thinks that they have some sort of superiority complex over those who use heroin, you are kidding yourself. You are a junkie just the same way that a heroin user is a junkie. There is no difference between you and them. Actually, you're getting a little better stuff, so you're more of a junkie because what you have is made in a lab and isn't cut with all the other adulterants like talcum powder or any of the other stuff. So you're getting purer heroin, really. So you're more of a junkie than they are. All right. Don't deceive yourself that way. That's just the slow, long road into hell. You're just prolonging your misery by lying to yourself in that way. But anyway, so I go to rehab for. I didn't even last the full 30 days. I lasted maybe 22 days. I just couldn't take it because I wanted out of a bad situation, but I really didn't want to quit. The entire time I was there, I debated and thought I was like a know-it-all, debating and arguing with the staff, who looking back were humored me pretty well. I could tell even at the time that they were just like, they had seen a lot of people just like me who thought they knew everything and wanted to argue about the 12 steps and whether you really needed to follow the 12 steps to get clean. I was just making excuses, let's be honest. There was no reason for me to fight them on anything. I had gone to them looking for help, and instead I fought with them. It was because I wasn't ready to get clean. And that's quite honestly the truth. If somebody's not ready, they're not going to get clean. Um, I mean, it sucks. You can argue with them, you can fight with them, you can pray for them. There's a lot of things you can do, but ultimately, at the end of the day, um, if they're not ready, they're not ready. This is one reason why I say that addiction, and I've said this many times, probably in my podcast, but I've told this to a lot of people. Addiction to heroin is the closest. It's the most. If you want to understand our spiritual condition, being enslaved to sin, I think heroin addiction is the most. It's the best physical image that you can possibly give to a spiritual truth. Um, so if just I always like to mention that because I'm a Christian, I believe that we're all sinners and that we need to be saved from our sins. The only way we're going to get to heaven is through the sacrifice that Christ made. But my point in mentioning the drug is that an addiction is that until Christ basically I'm a Calvinist, so I believe that you are spiritually dead, which is kind of the mirror image of addiction, total enslavement to your sin, just the way you're totally enslaved to heroin. And then when the Holy Spirit opens your eyes, that's called justification, regeneration, justification, and makes you aware of your sin. Then you trust in Christ for your salvation and repent of your sins. But um, that dependence, that addiction to heroin, I think is a perfect image of how you are before you're saved. That addiction to sin. Martin Luther talks about your free will, and how really there is no such thing as free will. Your will is dead. It is clouded in total bondage to sin, but you choose freely according to that will. So that's the same thing as addiction in a lot of ways. You're totally enslaved to this thing, and yet you choose freely to do the things that you do. So that if you shoplift, or you rob a bank, or you sell drugs, or you shoot somebody, or you do any of the, or you sell your body, or any of the number of crimes that you can commit in a lifestyle of addiction, you will be prosecuted for it. The excuse that I am an addict does not work. Just the same as the excuse that, well, my will is dead, when you stand before God, is not an excuse either. You still chose freely according to that will. I just thought that was interesting. That's why I mention it. I've told that to a lot of people. Um, but anyway, so I got out of there, and basically, like I said, I relapsed 2 days later. This lady that I had mentioned before, Elaine, we'll call her, she had gone to rehab at the same time as me. We had been pooling our money together and working together, just to help each other out. As we were like a tag team as far as the drugs went. And we would always, she worked, I worked, and we would pool our money and help each other out, basically. Because it is hard to go it alone. It really is. And I don't want to get into all the personal stuff, but that's what was happening mostly there. Um, and so it is amazing too that even with 30 days, or almost 30 days, like I think it was 25, you think that, well, it might take you a while to get back into the full swing of things as far as your addiction. But like I said, I relapsed 2 days after I got out, and I admitted it to my parents. But it was like that, like no time at all before I was right back to where I was at in my addiction, in my mental state, my dependency, and everything. It was like no time had elapsed at all. uh, like I'd never gone to rehab. I was right back where I started. And so for about a year, things were really like went downhill quick as far as my lifestyle. I spent all my time at the crack house in Wilmington with that lady Betty, just always there driving people around. I spent so much time there that they really started to get sick of me. They were starting to really sour on me. Just, I had gotten away with so much while I was there because, I got paid well for the work that I did. And so I kind of bought people off. Like I had a lot of people hanging around me there, that I would give like a bag here and a bag there, and kind of like buy their loyalty in a lot of ways because I'm not a big person. And I didn't do that intentionally just to buy their loyalty. A lot of times I would just be high and just be in a jovial, good mood and toss somebody a bag or something, or buy them a cigarette. Um, but, oh, my phone. Um, yeah, but so eventually, of spending so much time there, I just they started to sour on me. I just started to notice some of my things starting to disappear out of my car, stuff like that. And then one of them stole from me directly, like my drugs. It just all went downhill very quickly. Um, the lady Elaine's car got stolen, and trashed. We spent an entire night looking for it around the ghetto, finally found it. A dealer found it for us. Just things started getting very crazy. People I knew were dropping like flies from overdoses. All these things were just happening like very, very fast. I was not eating at all, and my tolerance was going absolutely through the roof. Things were just getting really crazy really fast. Um, really crazy really fast. Uh, People just dying of overdoses. A close friend of mine did. There were a couple suicides directly related to addiction. Um, it was getting harder and harder. Just and as time progressed, you really, as I mentioned before, you cross these lines. You cross all these lines, um, as the things that you said. I will not do this. I will not do that. As you cross all those lines, and your self worth and your self esteem and your value of yourself just totally disintegrates. And that toll that it takes on you, and also something that isn't mentioned or spoken of as much is the toll that withdrawal takes on you too. I've told many people many different times that every time it seemed like that I went through withdrawal, I lost a part of my soul, and it really did feel like that. And I think a lot of people would agree with me because nobody can go through that and just shrug it off. But anyway, what ended up happening after a year and things really declining, just my health. I weighed, I was like skin and bones, all these things. What ended up happening was I just gave up. I knew that I just could not go ahead any further. The lady Elaine that I knew, she went into rehab again for the second time, and not too long after that, I made the call again, and I ended up they. I lived out near Kennett Square in Pennsylvania, and they called me and they said there was a program that I called that looks around for open beds at rehabs, and they called me and said, "Hey, we have an open one in Harrisburg," and which was 2.5 hours away. And meanwhile, I had mentioned nothing to my parents. This is how pathetic I was. I told them, they said, we'll send a van and come get you. 2.5 hours. And I was like, all right, call me when you get close. And so I threw everything into a suitcase, tossed the suitcase out my bedroom window. They called me. They said, we're a couple houses down, because I said, don't park in front of my house. And I walked out the front door like nothing was happening, got in there, and started driving towards Harrisburg rehab. And I sent a message on text and Facebook to my mom explaining everything. That's how pathetic it was. That's how low it was. And I still feel terrible for that. I can't imagine the pain that caused both of them, my parents. Um, but the difference this time, and I'm going to end on this because the next couple episodes I'm going to be talking more about recovery and everything, the basically what happened to me after rehab. Um, but I want to end on this. The difference between, and I went to a place called Common Ground. The difference there is that this time I totally like just had given up. Like I knew there was no fuel left in the tank. There was nowhere else I could go. I was like totally done. I had no answers whatsoever. All I knew is that I just couldn't do anything that I was doing anymore, and I had to just give up and repent. I knew that definitely, as far as my relation to God, that was something that I had to fix too, because I had trampled on that completely, calling myself a Christian for all those years and living like the devil, as they say. I knew that I had a lot of repenting to do as well. So I just totally gave up. and went in there just admitting and knowing that, like, no matter what they said, no matter what I thought of the 12 steps, no matter what I thought of this or that or anything, and believe me, at Common Ground, anyone who's ever been there knows that that place is a dump, and a lot of the stuff they try to tell you is stupid. But I went in there and I said, I don't care how stupid it is. I'm an idiot because I'm here, and obviously the things I'm saying and the things I'm doing are not working, so I have to try something else, no matter how stupid it may seem. So that's what I did, and it was the best thing I could have possibly done. Now, in next week's podcast, I'm going to pick up on what happened to me there, kind of what I think of a lot of the rehab programs, maybe things they could do better, or things that I think they did well, and kind of pick up from there and go on to kind of where I'm at now, and that growth that has to take place if you're going to stay clean and sober, because you don't just go into rehab for 30 days and everything is going to be roses and peachy. I don't care what rehab you go into. There is no such place. It's just going to cure you. You have to work on yourself. There's things you have to do. Um, so that's what I'm going to go over. But in the meantime, that's all I'm going to cover for now. So good night and God be with you.